Hi everyone, Kristina here. Welcome to another card video at my YouTube channel and blog. Today I'm going to be showing you a couple cards using liquid masking fluid. So this is going to give you some ideas on how to use this new stamp set from Simon Says Stamp with watercoloring and liquid masking fluid. So the stamp set I'm using today is called Wake Up and Makeup. For any of you girly girls out there, this is perfect for you or for your very girly girl friends. And today I'm going to be using some watercolor paper. This is actually Arches, I think it's called Bright White or whatever. I posted on Instagram, like I was showing you the difference between this extra white version of the Arches watercolor paper, and I decided that it wasn't a big enough difference between this extra white version and the original. So I'm just using up what I have on hand, and then I'll go back to using my regular Arches. So I've taken the stamps from the stamp set, just a bunch of them plus a grading, and I've arranged them on this watercolor paper. I'm also using the creative corners from Misty so that I can have my watercolor paper in that corner and have the stamps go off the edge. So I use that corner and then I remove it right before I start stamping. And that allows me to put the paper back in place after I stamp, and then I can stamp it multiple times. I'm using some VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a great ink for watercoloring because it's waterproof and it dries fairly quickly too. So I'm stamping this once and I get a fairly good impression, but the area that says Hello Gorgeous, where it's that really solid lettering, even though I pressed it down very, very well, it still wasn't as solid as I wanted. And that's mostly because of the watercolor paper texture. Watercolor paper, especially cold pressed watercolor paper, has a little bit of an uneven, rough surface. So when you're stamping images, no matter what ink you're using, sometimes you will need to stamp the images twice. That's why I really recommend using a stamp positioning tool like the Misty to help you get a perfect impression. So I'm pressing that down once again, making sure I have a really solid black area on those letters. And I did only have to stamp this twice. Sometimes I stamp things 3 times, but just twice worked well. I'm going to be making 2 cards today, so I have another piece of watercolor paper, and I've arranged the 3 lipsticks in the stamp set, as well as this greeting that says, "Life is hard, there's always lipstick." And I'm going to be using these to create a very simple card. This one is much more clean and simple as compared to that first card. And like I did with the first one with all of those images, I'm going to be stamping this card twice just to make sure I have a really solid stamping, especially over that greeting. Those thick letters really need quite a bit of extra ink. And while I've got my stamp positioning tool out, while I've got my Misty out, I'm going to stamp a secondary greeting for the first card, putting that greeting down at the bottom just over some Licorice Twist cardstock from Basil. And I'm going to move the door of my Misty over to pick up that stamp, and then I'm going to prep the area with an anti-static powder tool. I plan to use some white embossing powder for this greeting, so I wanted to make sure that the area was prepped before I start my heat embossing process. Stamping the greeting in Versamark ink, and since this is a very dainty, very small letters on this greeting, I did use very light pressure when I stamped it down. Shaking off the excess of that white embossing powder that I've sprinkled on. And then I used my heat tool to heat set this until it was completely melted and smooth. So now I'm going to work on the actual card painting itself. I've taped down the entire watercolor piece using some blue painter's tape. I'm going to be using quite a bit of water, so using some tape, using some tape like this works well. Using this really large watercolor set from Sakura. This is one of their koi watercolor sets. And like I mentioned before, I am using drawing gum or liquid masking fluid. And every once in a while I break this out. Sometimes I